Have you wondered how to use the equations filter? Well, this video will tell you everything about the equations filter, one of the most powerful features of Affinity Photo. Now, at this point, I've got a shape. And the shape, you can create any shape, simply just go over here. There's diamond tools, there's all these things. I'm going to go with the cog tool. Now, I'm going to create it in the center. And you'll notice when I create in the center, I've got this gap here and a gap here. Now the document's about 1920 by 1080. That shape is a vector design. I can make it any size, but let's go with the equation filter now. Filters and distort and equations. So select that. Panel always goes over the side, and I'm going to go with Cartesian. And that means X and Y. If I go for polar, you get R and T. But X and Y, and I can modify that equation there. X equals X. So it's done nothing, no change whatsoever. So I can modify this. I can just go to this X field, and I can say X divided by, and that's a slash, divided by 2. And that will just work on the horizontal. And I can do the same. Y divided by 2. And you can see it's crunched in the corner there. It's obviously a lot bigger than it was. The extend mode at the bottom. These ones full, repeat, basically the same with shapes. You can also go for mirror. And at this point, because it's the only thing on the page, only thing in the document, it fills that size. It's exactly the same. You can't move it, unfortunately. It's not like procedural textures. But what you can also do is instead of divide or slash, you can put X times 2. Now, anytime you haven't finished the equation or you've made a mistake, you'll notice it goes red. Doesn't matter, don't worry about it, but also you'll just see the original. And the original now is a pixel layer. Even if you undo, you cancel it, it's still a pixel layer. You've just got to remember that. So you can't modify it. So you've got to work with what you've got. So X times 2, and you can see now you get 2. It's shrunk it. And you can do the same here. Y times 2, and I'm going to do both. You could do Y times 3. That's, of course, you could do any number. And now you can see you've got 4. But what's happened is that shape has shrunk, but you've still got that gap because there was gap around it. So it sort of makes it, you haven't filled the space. So with this mirror, you can go wrap. There's subtle difference, very subtle. Obviously, it depends on how the actual cog is, how it reflects. And you can do the same, Y divided by 3. So you end up, again, you've still got the same issue. There's quite a gap between them. You might not want that. If you don't want that, unfortunately, what you need to do, let's just go back out. Cancel that. Again, go to the cog tool. You can, of course, create it right at the top. Now, of course, you're distorting it. So if you're going to create it, obviously make a document that's 1,000 by 1,000 and not obviously something slightly larger horizontally and vertically. And you can put it like that. Now, if I do it now, let's just go back to the filters now. So filters, and again, you can see it's a cog still, so you can modify the number of teeth and just change that before doing anything else. But I can now go to filters, and I can go to distort and equations. Now when I do exactly the same, so I'm just going to go X times 3, crunches in that corner, Y times 3, crunches in that corner again still. But I can go down here and I go mirror, and you'll notice now there's no gap, which is the way that I personally most time I want it. But unfortunately there's no mode to stretch it out, sort of ignore that gap. You have to do it manually before you actually go into the equations. So let's just work with this now. So I've got X times 3 and Y times 3. Well, you can modify that. You don't have to go with 3. You might think, well, I don't want 3. I want 4 or 5. You can just change it. So 5, you can make it 5 there, or 10. And you can see then, obviously you get here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So you get exactly the matches the document. Cross and obviously down 3. So if we want, you can put 10 there. So again, you get I'm not going to count them, but it's 10. You notice I'm using 10. You don't have to use 10. You could put 10.2 or 10.4, and you can see what happens. You get this slight additional entry. So if I put 10.6, you get more of it, but it's not complete. So generally I like to keep it as 10, looks nicer. But what you can also do is you can put times, and again, the asterisk, that's the thing that's used for times. So you put asterisk, which is on the 8, again, because it's not correct, it will see that red there, times A. Now, why am I using A? Well, you've got these parameters, and you can see parameter A, and I don't know why they put uppercase A, since you have to put lowercase a. Makes no sense, but still, that's what it's got. So bracket A, you could put bracket A if you want, doesn't matter. Sometimes that's useful as well for other reasons. So I've got that times A. And so if I change this, you can see what happens. So go, now this, when it's here, the A value is set to 1. So it's 1, around about the middle there, just it's approximately there. Unfortunately, there's no graduations, there's no markers pointing out where 0.5 is, but I think that looks about the middle. So there, it's 0.5. So here, it's x times, obviously, the value 5. And then you can push it all the way down, and then it gets to 0. And that's it. You just end up with a straight line. And you'll notice you've got here 10. Now, the 10 is not this 10, but this 10. So if you want 100, say you want 100 straight lines, well, there's certainly a fair number there anyway. I haven't counted them, maybe there's not 100, but certainly you can go for, say, 1 there or 50, and you can see you can generate quite a few thin lines there. And I'll put it back to 10. But this A is useful, but you can also use B as well as C. And you can use B and C in the same X, or you can use them in the Y. So in this case, I'm just going to put 10 times B. And again, you see the same thing, that while you're typing it, it always comes up with an error. I'm never so keen on that. I wish it wouldn't do that, because you're not obviously, you haven't got an error, it's just typing it. So it always goes red at that point. So we've got there times B, and then I can reduce B, and you can see what happens. You get less lines as you reduce it. So if I again go and put, say, 100 there, you can change that, and you can see the result there. And again, just change the B, and as you do that, see the lines changing all the way back down to what it was before. So at 0.1, it will be the same as it was when it was just times 10. So let's just reduce that down to back to 10 again, and again here times like that. But you can use parameters. You can use, of course, parameter C as well. You don't need to just keep it X in the X field. You can use Y as well. There's no other ones. You can only use X and Y. There's functions, and I will show you those as well. But what you can do, just go up here. X equals X plus Y and bracket. Make certain it's in a bracket. So you can put bracket around left bracket and right bracket around the X plus Y. You can also change the Y field and do exactly the same. The result is not particularly great. But you can also modify here. You can say Y equals, and then you can put, instead of Y there, you can put X. Or, as I mentioned, you can do exactly the same. But what happens? You end up with these straight lines, which is a great effect in itself. I'm just going to put that back to Y. Now you don't have to use, of course, 10 in both. You can use 20 instead. And you can see again that slant there. Now if you want the different angle, you can always go X instead of plus Y, you can always put X minus Y. So you can just vary it, you can see, just change it, and it goes the other way. But you can also put 2 times. So let's just put 2 times, like that. Or maybe 4 times. And you can see and create different slants. You can also shift or offset the designs. Just go to the X field and you've got times 5 or times 10. You can always add just a constant. So you can just put plus 200 and you can see that shifts it. Or 300. Unfortunately, there's no feature to move it if you're just moving it around like you would in the procedural texture. But you can also do the same in the Y. You can put plus 400 and it shifts it down again. At this point, really useful, perhaps use parameters. So you've got the 300 there, and of course it depends on the size of the document. You might like to use the width of the document. So let's just go and use that. Let's just use W. That's all you need to do, W. And you can also put here H. That's for the height. So that uses the height of the document as well as the width of the document as well. But now I can put times A. So I'll just put times A, and I'm going to put times B. And that will now, because it's 1 and 1, it's just using W and obviously H. But now if I use A, you can see it shifts it by half just by moving it to the centre. Also I can do the same, and again you can move it down that way or move it up or down. And that's just by using A as well as W. And of course you could use 300 or 500, whatever you want to use there. Equations filter can also use functions. There's not many functions that work with it. I've gone through a few of them like sine, cosine, square root, etc. They work well. Here's an example. Here's square root, and you've got bracket x times w times a, where a is the parameter. So if I go over here and I can just drag this out, you can see the result. It distorts the design in a slightly unusual way. And you can of course apply it with y as well. But you can use sine, cosine and many others. And you of course can use it here with the extend mode as well, sometimes to better effect. Best help though, procedural texture. If you want to find out about it, simply go up here, go to the procedural texture. Don't go to the equation section. The equation section's got very little help, doesn't tell you anything about the functions. Now there's quite a lot of detail here, but lots of these will not work. You type it and you'll probably find it just goes red. It just will ignore it. So you can see all these ones down here. Some like the OSC, some of those work, but there's lots of these smooth ones. You might find they work, sometimes they won't. Unfortunately, with equations, there's no presets feature. So if you find a great function, a great set of equations, you can't store them. But there's a workaround, and the workaround being macros. So just cancel that. Key thing is just go over here, make certain you turn it on. So just go here to macro, which you can find in the window menu. So window and macro, all the panels are here. So macro, just make certain you click here and it's recording. Then you can go to filters and go down to distort and equations. And you can see you've got your equation there, and you can put times 5 and y times 5 or whatever equation you want. And again, 0, go for mirror if you want that, and then click apply. And you notice then you've got your equations stored away there. And you can stop it. So here's the stop, so click there, and that stops recording. Now at this point, what you've got this. So go over here, equations, click there, and you've got the parameters. Unfortunately, you haven't got the equations. That would be very nice, but unfortunately, all that's available, the parameters. But you can store it away to a library, and this needs window and library. So you can store it for future use. So here's the library, and with this, just go here, and that will add that to the library, and that will add that equation. Just click there, and you can see add there. I've just got default, and I'm just going to give it a name. So 5 times equation, something like that, just so I know that that's what it is, and click OK. And with that, you can see just down the bottom, 5 times equation there. So now I've got this design. Obviously, I want to put it back to what it was. So I've got this. I can now run it. And I can run it from here. Of course, it's still in the macro. So just click here. And you can see it processed instantaneously. You can also go here as well. There, double click. And you can double click it twice. And then you end up with even smaller designs. You might not want to do that, of course. Let's just go back just to the 5. So just click, and then you got it there. And click again, and you can see the result. You can also add layer effects. So I'm just going to create the shape again. So I just create it like that. Then you can go to Layers, and you can go to Effects. So just click there. And then you can go to Outer Shadow or 3D. I'm just going to go with Outer Shadow and then Radius, Offset and Intensity. So you can see now you've got a shadow. Click Close. You can then go to Filters, Distort and down to Equations. And do exactly the same as before. X times, this time I'm going to go with 10 and Y times 10. And again, go with Mirror, and you can see all of the designs there have got the same shadow effect. And click Apply. You can do the same with 3D and others as well. When you use these equations with a shape, you've also got a background here of transparency. So you can use that to combine multiple layers. So I've just used X times 5 again and Y times 5 and using Mirror. And if I apply this, click Apply, you can see I get this layer. Well, I can duplicate this layer. So I just go to Layer and Duplicate. We'll just use Alter Option. And I can move it. So this design can then be moved and you can create all kinds of checkerboard designs. You can also add live filter effects to this equation. Now you can do it in different orders. So the first one, let's just have this selected. Go to Filters and down to Distort and Equations. And then I just go here and I can say, again, X times 10 and Y times 10. Exactly the same as before. And go down to Extend Mode and Mirror. So I've got that, got all of those entries just created and click Apply. But what I can now do is add a live filter effect to it. So Layer and New Live Filter Layer. Now unfortunately there's no Equations one. That will be brilliant. Unfortunately version 2 still not available. But then go down here and you've got obviously 12 displace. I'm going to go with 12. And with that you can change the angle, change the radius, and you can see the result. Distort whole loads of great, all kinds of images using this. And close. And you'll notice when you go over here to the layers, you've got your live filter and you can modify it at any time. So just double click and it brings up the panel again and you can tweak it and change it again and close again. But what you can also do is you can apply it to the actual design. So let's just go back to the cog. So with this cog, you can go up to Layer. So you do it obviously in reverse. So let's go with this one first. Go to New Live Filter Layer and down to Distort and 12. Exactly the same panel. And you can modify the angle and you can see the result there. You can distort it and also change the origin point. And you can create a design, say like that. And close that. And you can see exactly the same as before. You've got that design. You can just double click, bring up the panel and tweak the values. But what you can now do is you can go up here to, with that selected, all that design selected, go to Filters and Distort and down to Equations. Exactly the same as before. You can now put in here X times 10 and you can see the result of that 12 is still there. And Y times 10 and again use Mirror. And you can see that. Now this, you can see the reason for the difference between Mirror and Wrap. So if I go here and go for Wrap, you just get design repeated endlessly. But if I go for Mirror, it's flipped. So you can see design there. Likewise, if I go for Repeat, just puts it at the top, full, etc. I'm just going to go with Mirror and click Apply. But you'll notice what happens. You lose the live filter effect. It's not stored, not saved for each of those individual ones. So you can't tweak it and change it at any point afterwards. You can also use the filter with multiple shapes. So if you want to, simply select all of the shapes. And what you need to do is group them. You need to group them and rasterize them. So go to the Layers panel, select them all, and right click and group. So with them all grouped, you can then go to Layer and down to Rasterize. And they're all rasterized into a single pixel layer. Once you've done that, you can go to Filters and Distort and Equations. And now what you get, if you put X times 10, you will get those designs repeated, Y times 10, exactly the same as before. So you can see it, mirror or wrap. You can do this, of course, with multiple shapes, like 15 or 20 shapes, different colours, different designs, but they all need to be grouped. If they're not grouped, what will happen? It will just apply the effect to one. Also, if you use the rasterize, what happens? It will just rasterize all of them, but it won't put them all into a single pixel layer. Of course, you can always do a merge visible, is another option. You can also use the filter with channels. Here's the channels panel. You can find that in the window menu. So just go to window and channels, and you can see composite red, composite green. Now, if you've got a red design like this, using composite green and composite blue, it's not going to be very helpful. So what you can do, change the colour. So I'm just going to go with, for this one, just grey. So you've now obviously got a mix of reds, greens and blues. So with this, I can go to composite red, and I can do exactly the same equation as before. So filters, distort, and equations. And with that, exact same, you can put times 5, and maybe Y times 3, and mirror. And you can see the result. Now you'll notice what happens. The result is only applied to the shape, the channels. Very strange, but that seems to be the way it works. If you want to create it, of course, over the entire design, as before, probably a good idea is create a background. Just create a background using a rectangle tool and creating that shape. And then that's the background, and you can combine that design with the background and then use it. So that's a workaround. So click apply. And that's just to red. Now I go to composite green, you can see the green there. And again, filters, go to distort and equations. And this time, green channel, I'm just going to put times 12 and Y times 5. Just want to change them. Don't want them all the same, otherwise you will not see the result. And again, go with mirror, and you can see the result there. And click apply. And you can do the same with blue. So go to blue and filters, distort and equations. And you can just go and put times 20. Let's make it more extreme, 29. Y times 29 as well. And again, mirror. Again, when you've got 0, you will not see anything because there it's over here and that's outside of that shape. So just go for mirror and you can see the result there and click apply. Now, of course, at this point, you don't want it just to be still stuck in the blue channel. You always have to remember, just go over to the channels panel and click. And you can see the result of that. And it creates a very unusual, interesting design. Now, the grey is gone. But what you've got instead, you've got the reds, you've got the blues and the greens, all using different equations. And of course, you can apply other filter effects to this as well. So blur and maybe motion blur to create different designs using that. You can also use the filter with images. I've placed this one. So you go to File and Place, and that places a document. But the format of the document is slightly odd. And it doesn't work so well with the equations. So if I use it, you'll find that it's very hard to place it, position it. So if I go to Filters and down here to Distort and Equations, and now I enter something, I'm just going to quickly do this just to demonstrate. X divided by 2. It's gone. Where? It's just shunted off to another position. It's just off the screen. So it's very hard to use. There's a workaround, as with most things. So you've got this. All you need to do is go to Layer, and you can go down here, and you can say Rasterize and Trim. So as soon as you do Rasterize and Trim, it turns into an image format that can be used. So now if I go here to Filters, and I go to Distort and Equations, and this time, if I put X divided by 2, it works in the way that should be how it works in the first place, but doesn't. So you can go y divided by 2. And you can see what happens. It doubles the size. Obviously, it makes twice the size one direction and twice the size the other way. So it's actually 4 times. And you can do exactly the same. X divided by 3, y divided by 3. You can still, of course, go plus 200, so you can shift it, or you go minus 200. So you can move it around, but unfortunately you can't interactively move it around. But you can use those, just minus 400. Again, it's off the screen, but if you go for plus 400, you can see it there, just shifted there. And that's zooming in and making it much, much bigger. So again, if you want to, you can put, say, 600 there, plus 600, and you can see there. But it does make it slightly fiddly to zoom in into a particular location on the image. But you can do exactly the same as you did before. You can go here, put W and H. But you can see it goes off the screen again. But this time what you can do, you can put times A and times B. So you're using again these parameters. So now what you can do is as you drag the A, you'll notice that the image doesn't appear on the screen at all until you bring that B down. It's still obviously off the screen. So you can now move it around, reposition it. Not ideal way of doing it. Would be great if it was a bit easier to do. But you can move it around and position it. Say you've got something highlight that you want to really zoom in. You can use this approach very quickly to do this. But you can also use mirror, but of course it goes beyond that. So again, if you zoom out there, the mirror effect unfortunately is not so useful in this case. Well, what you can also do is instead of that, you can go X times 3. So you end up, this time, you do get the mirror effect. I know it's very strange, but that's the way it works. And Y times 3. And you can see now you've got this image. And exactly the same as before, you can just move that around. So if you want to, you can position it like that. And because there's a gap, now it's not perfect. When you're using a layer, such as an image that you've placed, you end up with this gap. Now, if you're just doing this, and I'm just going to cancel it now. If I go to this document, I go into a document like this. Now this fills the entire document. I've opened it. It works a whole lot better. So you just go here to filters, going distort and equations. And in this case, what you can do, exactly the same as before. So X times 2 and Y times 2. And you can see it's up here on the top, it's been shrunk. And you can do, of course, 3 to make it a lot smaller. Now, of course, exactly the same as before, extend mode. You can go for full. Now with full, you'll notice what happens, you get this white background. If you go for just 0, you get transparency, which may or may not be of use, because once you've got that transparency, of course, you can combine them in much easier ways. And you can also use repeat, which personally I never like, because what happens, it just drags the pixels from the edge. And you can see the effect there. But of course, if that's the effect you want to achieve, it's great. In some cases, it's a really powerful feature. But you can also go again with wrap, and you can see what happens. You get 3, because obviously I've got 3 there, X times 3, and you can see the 3 there and Y times 3. Of course, I could do Y times 2, and you can see obviously you've got 2 there. And you can do exactly the same, put parameters if you want to, A, and you can put times B. And again, you can reduce the size and stretch it or go that way. And also, of course, what you can do, mirror. And it just flips it, which actually makes a nicer, seamless tile. And you can do exactly the same as before. And you can tweak all these values, make it 1, or again, / divide by 3 or divide by 4. By default, it's Cartesian, and that's X and Y. But you can also use polar. So just go for it, polar. Just click polar. You'll see if you go Cartesian, backwards and forwards, it will change here. Now it's got R equals R and T equals T. You can also use all of the parameters just as before. You can also use all extend modes. You can go for mirror, full, etc. But what you can do, you can go here, R divided by 10. So you can get a lovely zoom effect. But one great feature about this, compared with X and Y and Cartesian, is that you can now move it. So you can actually move it around. You can change the origin point. You couldn't do that with X and Y. So I'm just going to go here, R times 10. And you can see the results of that. And you can move it, reposition it. You can also add in, exact same as before, you can bring in T. T times 5. Now sometimes it might not have any effect, but you can use it. Go for here. So T divided by 5. And you can see the result of that. And again, you can still continue to move it around, reposition it. Maybe go for T times 5. And you can create some very interesting radial designs very quickly. Maybe change that to 3, R times 3, and position that. And you can see as you move that origin point, the design changes. And you can extend beyond the document. So you can put it here or drag it over this way. And you can see as you do that, it follows it. And you can go here and you can put T times 5 minus R. Now sometimes the result might be a bit extreme. Get some spiral design. So I've got here divided by 4, but maybe go for divided by 20. And you can see the result of that. Maybe you might keep, instead of R there, just put a single R. And then you've got the R divided by 20, or maybe divided by 50. And again, you've got this lovely spiral design, which you can then reposition, move around, and you can still see, of course, the original design. And you can modify this. So again, just put times 10, or times 2, or 4. And also, you can use the parameters. So I'm just going to put times A. So in this case, I can then reduce that down so you can see what happens. Now, one thing that's always an issue with radial, you'll notice sometimes you get this sort of gap, this change over. You can see the change. Well, you can always, of course, just move it out that way to avoid that. But it always cuts through like that. It's not great, but that's the way it works. You can, of course, move that and reposition it, and you might get, say, like there. There's certain points where you'll see it connects again, and that is, of course, at 0. But if you push it there halfway, you can see that dividing line. And of course, you can modify it even more, maybe divided by 500. And again, you can see the result of that. Literally thousands of different designs can be created by using this polar effect, and still, of course, modifying R as well. All the filters in Affinity Photo can be applied multiple times. So here you've got this equation. You've got here R times 5. You can apply it. I'm just going to apply it to that layer. Once you've done that, you can go up to filters, and this can be done with any of the equations. Just simply go to filters and then repeat equations. Now the result may be a bit extreme. It may not be correct. You can always undo. You can see the result there, creating an even more intense design. Trouble with the repeat is it uses the original origin point, so you can't move it, you can't change it. Also, you can't change the parameters. But it does create some very interesting effects, which you can, of course, combine with other filters or just apply it again. And you can do a shortcut of Command or Control F, but you can use any of these other ones here as well and modify it even more. Another really useful feature of Affinity Photo is that you can fade the result of any of these filters, and especially equations. So create a design such as this using just a very simple formula like T divided by 5 and polar. Click apply and using mirror. What you can then do is you can go to layer and fade equations. Now in Photoshop, it's in the edit menu. For Affinity Photo, it's in layer. So fade equations. And you can see what happens. And that's just with normal. It just fades 50%. So you go here, put it to 0. You can see the original. Push it all the way there. You can see the result of the filter. So if you got it at 50, you can also use blend modes. So let's just go for darken or color blur, lighten. So lighten, you get this lovely effect where you've got like strands of color being positioned there. Now you can't modify the origin point. You can't modify the effect, unfortunately. That will be one great feature if it was a live filter, but this is a great workaround. So here you can simply again go for fade or go the other way. Now if you go for fade 100%, you just get the effect as if it's normal. If you go this way, you get the blend. And you've got here lighten, and you can go for, say, difference, and you can see the effect there. And then once you've done that, click apply. And you can still, of course, apply it again if you wish. You can always go to layer and fade to fade, and then apply fade there. So you can blend in between those, or use difference again, and click apply. But you can also still go to filters and repeat equations. So if you want to, just go to repeat equations, which will then apply the effect again using the same origin point that was applied earlier in the actual equation. And then you can again go to layer and fade equations. So again, you can blend between the effect. You can see the result of that. Again, you can use lighten or maybe go for difference. Blend between that and click apply, and so on. So you can create some amazing effects just by going between layer and fade, and also repeat feature. You can also use the filter with multiple layers. So this one's just a duplicate of the other one, but reduced in size. Once I've done that, go to filters, and with that layer selected, that's the key thing, go to distort and equations. Now you can use Cartesian, but as soon as you use it, you'll notice that the layer will be shifted off the page. So I'm just going to quickly go over here and use polar instead. Makes it easier. So polar, and in this case, maybe just go for r divided by 5. And you can see the result. But the thing about this is you can still continue to modify the origin point, and you can see the underlying design there. So as soon as you do that, moving that around, you can decide, of course, you can add some additional equations, but I'm just going to go with that and click apply. And now you've got that design. You can then go over here, blend modes, and go through there, and you can go for, say, difference or soft light or screen, and combine the design. Of course, once you've finished, you can always go to layer, and you can then go down here and merge down. So it's all merged into a single layer. And of course, you can always apply the filter effect again if you wish. Just go into filters and repeat. You can also use the equations filter with patterns, with pattern layers. Now this background is a pixel layer. It needs to be a pixel layer. But to turn it into a pattern, go to layer and down to new pattern layer from selection. And this will work with any selection, but it needs to be pixel. So new pattern from there. Once you've done that, you can resize it. Now you'll see you've got this line here, which is not great, but you can always go over here with the move tool selected, go for mirror, and then you get that mirrored effect, and you can resize it and you can rotate it. But what you can also do is apply the equations filter. So go to filters and go to distort and equations. Now this works okay with X and Y, Cartesian, but it works a whole lot better with polar. So click polar, make certain polars on there, and then you can put r divided by 5. You can see the result there. And also, you can change the origin point, so you can see the result then of that. Create all kinds of amazing designs very quickly. Now it's working on this bounding box of a pattern. What you can also do, put r times 5 or r times 10 or 19. All kinds of designs. Now this, you'll notice what happens. It goes very small, which is not ideal. So you might like to go with just the t. So let's just go with t and t times 6. And you can see the result of that. And as you move that around, you can see the result of that. So that can create some very interesting designs from your pattern layer. Or maybe go for t times 10. But at any point, you can change origin points, so you can get all kinds of wonderful designs. Click apply. So once you've got that, you can still use it as a pattern. It's still a pattern layer. So you can then resize it. Now you can also see you've got transparency, so you can duplicate this as well. So you can create multiple patterns and combine them in many different ways. But as a pattern layer, you can also still go to filters and apply it again. So filters, distort and equations. Unfortunately, it always defaults back to Cartesian. So you've always got to go back to polar if you want to use it as polar. And again, go for t times 6. And you can see the result of that to create even more design. And also you've got extend mode. So you can always put it to mirror. And you can see that, which I think creates some very interesting designs very quickly. And click apply. If you want to, you can always rasterize this pattern layer. So you've got this design and you want to apply again the equations filter, but this time to the actual design, the whole design. You can always go over here, layer, and just rasterize it, and then apply the equation filter to the whole design. You can also use selections with the equations filter. So just go over here, and I'm just going to use a very basic one, elliptical marquee tool. So create that selection, and I'm just going to create it in the center. You can create, of course, any number of different selections. But you can also go to select, maybe go with feather. And I'm just going to increase the feather maybe to about 70 and click apply. Then go to filters and down to distort and equations. Now the default Cartesian doesn't particularly work brilliantly with this. So if I just go x times 2, you'll see what happens. You just get the result like this, which is fine. Maybe x times 3, get that result. You can also use mirror, and you can see the result there. Working with Cartesian is probably harder because you can't modify the origin point. So again, y times 3, and you can see that. Or maybe x divided by 3, and you see that. It does work okay, but I find it a little bit more flexible if you're using polar. So I'm just going to go with polar now. And you've got R and T, and also mirror. So in this case, again, R times 4. You can use that to create some but you can also move the origin point, so you can reposition it, something you can't do with X and Y. And maybe go for T divided by 5, or T times 5, to create that sort of design in the center, again, using that selection only. And then clicking apply. And of course you can still combine with all the other filters and repeat, as well as layer and fade equations as well. With the selections, you can invert it. So instead of using the effect here, applied here, you can use it here. So go to select and then invert pixel selection. You can see now you've got the selection outside. Go to filters and distort and equations. Polar, make certain that's selected. Go with mirror for the extend mode, and then go here. Instead of using T, maybe times 20. T equals T times 20. And you can also move the origin point. So if you want to, just shift it. So you create a lens flare effect. You can of course modify it. You don't have to have that. You could go for T times 6 to create something like that. You can also use R, so R times 2, or maybe R times 0.6 or 5. All kinds of different designs can be created very quickly using this approach. You can also use the other extend modes, maybe go with 0 instead to create this sort of effect, or full, and so on. But also what you can do, cancel that. You can go select and again invert pixel selection, so you've got this selection here. Go over here and select the elliptical marquee tool again, and then you can drag, you can reposition this. So just position it there. Now sometimes what happens, unfortunately, it does create this selection. It's slightly odd. So if you don't want that, select and deselect and just go for that selection again, just position it there instead. Now you can go to filters and repeat, so just apply it again, you can see the result there. Or simply go to filters and then down to distort and equations. Use polar and go for mirror and then go for T times 5 or something. And so you can vary it and create different designs all on the same image like that. Click apply. And of course you can repeat that and move that selection to a different position. Or maybe use select and feather or smooth or refine and so on. You can create loads of different designs with selections. You can also use the equations filter with masks. I've got this image open and I've got this layer selected, and it could be any layer. I can then go with that layer selected, go down the bottom, layers panel, and click here. With version 1, you only have the option for mask. You've got here 6. I'm going to go with the first option, mask. Now you need to fill it with something. I'm just going to fill it with gradient, but you could do with brush strokes, etc. So gradient tool and add. And it's just white to black. I'm using linear, but you could use radial or any of the other settings. Now I'm just going to modify it using the equations filter. So with it selected, and that's the key thing, it needs to be selected, not this, but this. Then go to filters and distort and equations. I'm going to use Cartesian, but radial, polar ones, perfectly reasonable. And I'm going to put x times 10. Now, because I haven't got the extend mode set to mirror, let's just set that to mirror. And you can see now what you get these columns. I can do the same here. I can put y times 10 or 20 or 30. Now you can see you get this grid, this diamond grid. Got transparency, so I'm just going to apply it. So applied, then I can select this again, this image, and I can duplicate this layer. So I can hold down the Alt Option key, or just go to Layer menu and duplicate, that's another option. And with that, you can see now I've got that, and I can select the right one. Let's just go here, use the Move tool, and I can reposition that layer. And you can see as you do that, you can create all kinds of combinations. And of course, you can always resize it, and you can duplicate it multiple times. You can also use blend modes and combine again in other ways. But of course, you could create all kinds of effects with equations and masks. You can also use the equations filter with text. What you can do, you can use it like this, so you'll end up with a gap all the way around the edge, which is fine. Of course, you can create complex text. You can maybe duplicate this design, create multiple shapes, different sizes, different text, and use that as a pixel layer. But you can also just use the basic text here, because you can resize it. You're going to distort it anyway using the equations properly, so you can always distort it to begin with. So just stretch it down this way. Now you might not want to do that. Do all kinds of different distortions before you start. Or just crop, of course, the text and image to make certain it's perfect for your use. That's probably a much better option. Then go to Filters and Distort and Equations. Now at the moment it's text, so make certain the text is spelt correctly. If you've got spelling, obviously it's turned into a pixel layer as soon as you do this. So Equations, you can see it comes up with an assistant saying it's been rasterized. Now I'm going to use Cartesian, but you could use polar as well. X and Y. So if I put x times 5, you can see it's crunched over there to the left. Now you can of course go minus 300, or you can go for plus 300. And you can see it's just shifted slightly. You might not want that, but maybe go here minus and 1,300. You can shift it along. 5,300. Now it doesn't really make that much sense because the document is not that big. So you clearly, this value will vary depending on your document, and you can just shift it along. So maybe 7,300 gets it to the far end. You don't have to do that because I'm going to use mirror next. But I just wanted to point out you can shift it, because you can't shift it. You can't move it. With polar, you can. Polar is very useful because it does allow you to do that. So let's just put it back to x times 5 or x times 10. But also what you can do, exactly the same as before, exactly the same with shapes, with images, you can put y times 10 and you can put it up in this top corner. And then you can go here and you go for wrap. Now wrap is better this time probably than mirror. It's up to you of course, but if you go for mirror, you can see what happens. It flips it. I'm just going to go with wrap. Well, you can modify it even more. You can maybe go for 20, x times 20 or y times 20. So you can create very quickly lots and lots. But you, of course, don't have to keep it just x. You can always say x, again, bracket, x minus y, bracket. And you can slant it. And you don't have to do that. You can go with Y times, let's put 3 times there. So you can get some very extreme text. And again, you go here. So bracket again, always put brackets around things. Plus there and bracket. And you can see the text now turned at that angle. Now, it's, of course, you could do much the same with pattern layers. But this is fairly flexible because there's a lot of other functionality. With pattern layers, all you can do is create it like that, straight text, but you can manipulate it in a lot more ways. Simply this way, you can put again 2.3. Now, that'd be tricky to do with pattern layers, but you can do it with this. So it really makes it very easy to create all kinds of very extreme backgrounds. And not only that, you've got polar as well. So click here with polar and it puts it back to R and T. That's where it goes. So R and T, let's just put R times 5. And you can see, of course, got that. But this means you can move it around. Not certain why X and Y can't have the move feature either, but unfortunately it doesn't seem to be there. So just move it around and instead of 5, go for 30. And you can see the text there. And again, you can still continue to move it. You can also then go minus T times 2 or 40. You can change things, modify it, and you can also use T times 4. And you can see this effect. And again, you can still continue to move the origin point. Maybe go for T times 2, create that. Or T times 1.2 or 0.8. Whole range of different designs can be created using this approach. And again, you still can modify this. You can go for R, let's put R divided by T. Just try all kinds of different combinations. You can see the result of that. And once you're happy, of course, you can click apply. And you can apply it again. Always go to filters and repeat equations. Now the result may be too intense, so you can always undo. And of course, as mentioned, you don't have to create text just like this. You can create text that's like this, maybe create this, create that. A few of these, maybe change the colour. So it's text there, so just click here, make it go red. Maybe select some of that, different things, whole range of different things. So you've got this design. So once you've got that design, I'm just going to merge them all. So layer, and just go to merge visible because I want them turned into a single pixel layer. And you can see the design there, pixel layer. And now you can use that with your equations. Now I'm just going to remove the previous text. Don't want those anymore. So I can use this. So this time, maybe apply another effect. So filters, blur, and motion blur. Create a nice motion blur, something like that. And maybe not there, just put it back there. Click apply. Then go to filters and again distort and equations. And with that you can do exactly the same. X times 5 and Y times 5. And again go for repeat or mirror. And you can see the result of that. Unfortunately, again, you can't move it unless you go for polar and then use T times 5 to create this sort of effect. So lots and lots of different designs can be created using equations with type, with patterns, with images, masks, whole load of different gradients and shapes, and probably lots more as well. The equations filter can be used with gradients as well to create some amazing designs. Go over here to layer, new layer, and then add a very basic gradient. Just white to black. You can use that, but you can also go to window and go down here to swatches. With your swatches panel, you'll notice you've got a whole range of different gradients. Now the gradients you've got probably will be different from my ones. So I'm just going to click here and add this gradient. But use any of the colourful gradients you've got. You can go to filters and down to distort and again equations. And it will use this colourful gradient. Now you can use it with, of course, X and Y, but if you're reasonable, again, X times 5, Y times 5, and also use mirror. And you can see you can create some very interesting gradients very quickly with this approach. But you can also use polar. So with polar, click there and then go for T times 5. And you can see the result. And of course, another thing, you can modify the origin point to create some very interesting colourful gradients super quick. You can also go here and R times 5 to create that type of gradient. At any point, you can go to wrap or go for 0 if you want just a basic gradient design, which also creates some very interesting shapes and effects. So I'm just going to put it back to mirror, and again I can modify this even more, maybe times then minus R times 5 or R divided by 5 to create spiral design very quickly from your gradient. Well, I hope you found this tutorial of interest. Any questions, please put in the comments below. Have you used this filter before? Have you found it tricky to use? Are there things that you've been struggling with? Please let me know about that as well, because maybe there's areas I just haven't touched upon, haven't thought about when it comes to the equations filter. Hopefully I've covered most of the points about the equation filter, but there's probably still tons more. Also, please subscribe. Always adding new tutorials all the time about Affinity Photo, as well as Photoshop and many other applications. Also a like or dislike, always appreciated. Thank you much.